Welcome back. Chapter 4. Roy Matthews wasn't from Ludlow. He'd been raised by his grandmother in Nisho, about 15 miles down the road. No one knew exactly what had brought him to Ludlow the night of the murders. Nisho was a bigger town, sporting not only a McDonald's but also 5 bars, a Mexican restaurant, and an ice cream shop. As far as the cops could gather after the fact, Roy hadn't had any friends in Ludlow, but something drew him to our town park, or someone. In the year after Eliza died, I drove by the house where Roy grew up a dozen times. I don't know what I thought it might reveal, why I found myself outside the tiny rundown ranch house over and over again, but whatever I hoped to find never showed itself. This morning, it looked even sadder than it had back then. Paint peeling off in long strips and the rusted chain link fence now sagging at the corners of the yard. A battered "Beware of Dog" sign hung off the gate, but there was no snarling beast in sight. I hadn't meant to actually stop. The plan was to drive by, give the house a look before heading back to Ludlow for breakfast at the diner. Cassie was working the morning shift and had promised to save me one of Mabel's famous cinnamon rolls, but when I saw what looked like fresh graffiti splash across the front of Matthew's tiny detached garage, I hit the brakes. "Murderer" in dripping red paint. I assumed the vandal had been going for murderer, but even with dubious spelling, the intent was clear enough. I wonder how often Roy Matthews' grandmother had to deal with things like this. Did it happen all the time? Or had the execution. Or had the execution started it up again? As if my thoughts had summoned her, I watched as Virginia Matthews emerged from the house onto her tiny front stoop. She was wearing a pink velour tracksuit, her sparse white hair permed to within an inch of its life. She looked smaller and frailer than I remember, as if a good strong wind might send her tumbling across the yard like a leaf. She paused when she saw my car idling at the end of her driveway and raised one liver-spotted hand in a tentative wave. I wasn't surprised that she didn't recognize me. It had been 13 years since we sat in the same crowded courtroom. She tried to speak to us only once, stammering out the beginnings of a tearful apology before my mother had steered us around her and out the door. And while Eliza and I had shared a few things, our height, our long fingers, a smile that was a little too wide for our faces, we never looked particularly alike, at least in the way most people compared appearances. Her hair had been coffee to my chestnut, her eyes brown to my hazel. It wasn't until they knew we were sisters that most people claimed to see a resemblance. I was easing my foot off the brake when a man rounded the corner of the garage, paint can in one hand and a roller in the other. He paused, shoulders tightened when he saw my car. Dean Matthews was taller and rangier than his younger brother, with the same mop of dark hair and straight brows. But unlike Roy's carefully neutral gaze, the look Dean gave me across the yard was quick and alive. His grandmother might not be able to place me, but Dean sure as hell could. During the trial, we sat on opposite sides of the courtroom for weeks, the only sibling of the victim and the accuser, and a macabre matching set. We never made eye contact, had never spoken a single word, a sudden flash of memory barreling up from the depths. Dean Matthews sitting stoic and stone-faced through the entire trial, except during the endless closing arguments when the prosecutor had waxed poetic about Roy's elaborate fantasy to kill Eliza and Travis. Personally, I hadn't believed Roy Matthews bothered thinking much beyond his next meal or can of beer. For his part, Dean had shaken his head slow and steady, unable to recognize his brother and the man the prosecutor was describing. Dean Matthews set the paint can on the grass and took a step toward the street. I pushed down on the gas, kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, watched him watching me as I drove away. Like most of Ludlow, the diner didn't look like it had undergone major upgrades in the years I've been away, but somehow its interior came across as homey and nostalgic rather than depressing. The boots along the wall were still covered in mint green fox leather, worn at the edges, and milky white pendant globes that reminded me of my elementary school classroom, hung from the high tin ceilings of black chains. This had been one of our favorite places to gather after school, doing homework while nursing chocolate milkshakes and inhaling all-you-can-eat basket of fries. We favored the two booths in the back, both roomy enough for a crowd. Cassie and Ryan and I crammed into one, sometimes joined by Stella from my homeroom or whichever girl Ryan was dating. The other booth home to Eliza, Travis, and their crew. But every once in a while, when everyone else was busy, it was just Eliza and me huddled together while she helped me with geometry and I proofread her English paper. We had never been the type of sisters who competed with each other, but we weren't best friends the way some sisters are either. Back then, I'd always hoped that would come later when we were older. The years binding us tighter and tighter. I always pictured us going to the same college, maybe even living together in an off-campus apartment, holding each other's hair back after drunken parties, helping each other through tough classes. Later, trading maid of honor duties at our weddings, cradling newborn babies, and talking on the phone every day during the hard early years of motherhood. Caring for our parents as they got older, then leaning on each other when we someday lost them. I'd always thought that eventually Eliza would be not just my sister, but my friend as well. Sometimes I thought most of my grief over her death stemmed from the loss of what might have rather than the loss of what actually was. I tore my gaze away from the black booth, shaking off the sharp twinge in my chest, and waved at Cassie as she poured coffee for Chet Majors at the counter. Chet smiled when he saw me, shifting slightly on a counter stool that seemed too delicate for his considerable bulk. "Well, goddamn," he said as I slid onto the stool next to him. "Look who the cat drug in." He put one arm around me and gave a gentle squeeze. "How you been, darling?" "I've been doing okay," I told him, patted his free hand with my own. Chet had always been Ludlow's resident. That's a word. With a heap inside of busybody. The one who screamed at you for getting up to no good, who complained about the diner coffee being too bitter or the burned out street light on the corner of Elm that needed replacing. The one who knew all the latest scuttlebutt and loved to share, even while he claimed to hate gossip. People like to complain about him behind his back, but I'd always loved Chet. Loved knowing he was watching out for me, for all of us really. He'd been a fixture in my dad's store. Semi-retired even back then, he liked to sit on the extra stool next to the cash register and keep my dad company. Talk my damn ear off, more like it, was my dad version of it. But I know he secretly looked forward to Chet's appearance every morning the same way I had. "How about you? Life treating you okay?" Chet said. "Got this bum hip makes it hard to walk, and these damn too high stools don't help the situation." Given Cassie's eye roll, I guess it wasn't the first time he had voiced that particular complaint. "And my grip is shot. Damn arthritis." He flexed swollen knuckles in my direction. "Never mind what anybody told you, Greer. All that rah-rah, you're only as old as you feel bullshit. Truth is, aging is a pain in the ass." He ain't never lied. "I don't doubt it," I said. Cassie slid a mug of coffee and a plate with a giant cinnamon roll across the counter towards me. "Enjoy," she said, "if you can manage it while listening to Chet." Chet ignored her good-natured dig, picked up a fork, and helped himself to a bite of my roll. "Heard you're some kind of school counselor up there in Chicago." "I am." I took a careful sip of coffee. The diner had always been known for liquids that could scald the skin clean off your tongue, and I doubted that had changed in my absence. "Kinda surprised to hear it. Never pictured you working in a school. Always thought Eliza was the one who liked kids." Wait a minute, she said they don't look alike. Okay. Goddamn Chet, for all his blabbing, he listened too. Kept everything filed away. "She did," I said, and stuffed a piece of cinnamon roll in my mouth to avoid elaborating. He was right, though. Working with kids had been Eliza's goal, never mine. Unlike her, I had no real idea what I wanted my future to look like. I'd floundered in college, changed my major half a dozen times, waited for advice or direction from my parents that never came. In the end, I decided to be a guidance counselor in some vain, pointless tribute to Eliza. Okay. Maybe I could fix what had been broken. My new career, my new life, proof that while Eliza was gone, her dreams weren't. And it turned out I was good at my job, even if most of the time I wasn't sure whether I enjoyed it. Maybe that's why the kids trusted me, though. Opened up to me in a way they didn't with most of the other adults in the school, because I didn't commit to the cardinal sin of trying too hard. But in some ways, that only made me feel like more of a fraud. Rather than giving something back to Eliza's memory, I ended up stealing from her future instead. Was all Chet said, for once keeping his abundant opinions under wrap. "What's with all the ribbons?" I asked, pointing with my fork at the red and blue bows ringing the pickup window behind the counter. The second the question left my mouth, I already knew the answer. Chet cleared his throat, eyes cutting away from mine. "Those are for Addie and Dylan, their favorite colors. We got them up all over town." "They were purple and green for Eliza and Travis," I said, my appetite suddenly gone. I remember seeing those ribbons on lampposts and doorknobs and wrapped around trees. A reminder, your sister is dead, everywhere I looked. "How's everybody doing?" I asked. Chet huffed. About like you'd expect, sleeping with one eye open and a shotgun in their hands." He shook his head. "It's been rough, Greer. Bring back a lot of bad memories. Everybody's hoping they saw this one quick, too. But it's already taken longer than most people would like." "You have any theories?" He shook his head. "Not a one. Baker's been trying to keep people calm. Seems pretty set on the copycat theory, and most people don't want to think it was someone from around here. Not like last time. Although in some ways that was better, knowing who it was and getting him locked up so quick. Made it easy to move on." He paused. "Although not for you, I reckon." "No," I said with a wince, "not for me." I pushed away the last of my cinnamon roll. "Did you know Roy Matthews back then? Before what happened to Eliza and Travis, I mean?" Chet furrowed his brows, but didn't seem particularly surprised at my question. "Know him? Not to speak of. I seen him around, but that's it." "Around Ludlow?" He nodded. "Not often. A few times that summer before. Driving that clunker of his. Probably wouldn't have even noticed him, but that damn muffler sounded like a jet engine. Course didn't actually know that was him until after the fact." My heart rate picked up, pulse thrumming in my neck. "What was he doing here, do you know? Was he ever with anyone?" "Not that I can recall. Just driving down Main, minding his business as far as I could tell." "And you never saw where he went?" "Assumed he was passing through." Chet clicked his tongue against his teeth. concern radiating from underneath his bushy brows. You don't still have questions about Roy's guilt, do you, darling? No, I reassured him. I never had questions about that. That much at least was the truth. Chet nodded, the sudden tightness in his shoulders easing away. Well, if it's any consolation, I'd still like to know why he picked your sister and Travis too. He shook his head. Never made a damn lick of sense. In his confession, Roy Matthews had said he'd never seen Eliza or Travis before the night of their murders, and I believed him. He hadn't seemed clever enough to cover his tracks or lie convincingly. If he'd been watching Eliza and Travis, keeping tabs on them, he would have been spotted. But maybe someone else had been watching, someone more cunning than Roy, someone careful, someone who knew how to kindle a thought in Roy's head and then nurture it into a flame. It was strange to actually walk into the Dewdrop Inn, one of Ludlow's only bars and a place I glimpsed multiple times from the open doorway but never actually set foot inside. In the 2 years after Eliza died, but before I left for college, I've been forced to collect my dad from the dough more times than I could count. It was where he hung out back when he was attempting to hide his drinking from us, when he still had shame. The call always came late, after closing time. My dad too sloshed to even be allowed to walk home along Ludlow empty sidewalks, never mind drive. My mom stopped answering the phone after the first few times, waving a weary hand in my direction from the doorway of her bedroom. I can't, she'd say. I just can't. I wanted to scream at her, retreating back. What makes you think I can? But the answer was in fact that I always did. Answered the phone, said I'd be right there, got into my mom's car with my newly minted driver's license, and drove the 5 blocks in the dead of the night. Met Jim, the ever-patient owner of the bar, at the door, and together we steered my dad into the passenger seats. Some nights he was singing off tune, a stupid grin on his face I wanted to slap off. Most nights he was weeping, mumbling my sister's name like a record stuck on repeat. Let me find out the dad did it. But tonight, I wasn't collecting a drunken parent. I was meeting Cassie and Ryan. Apparently, they had a standing Thursday night meetup, and now that I was back in town, it was assumed I would join in. I'd been to plenty of bars over the years that worked hard for their dive-inspired interior, but the dough appeared to come by its dive designation naturally after a lifetime of neglect. Warped wooden floors, cracked mirrors behind a topped bar, dim lighting that was less the result of intent and more function of a shitty bulbs. Everything in the bar looked at risk of leaving behind a sticky residue on your fingers if you touched it. Of the dozen mismatched tables, only half were occupied, although most of the bar stools were taken. Out of the makeshift dance floor, a lone couple swayed together to the faint twang of a country song. Good God, I said, pulling out a chair. This place is even more depressing than I imagined. And what is that smell? Beer and sweat, maybe a little vomit, Ryan said, matter of fact. You get used to it. We don't come for the ambiance, Cassie informed me. We come for the shitty drinks. Don't forget the stale peanuts, Ryan said, holding up a small bowl of pale, pre-shelled nuts. He motioned for the server, who was leaning against the far wall, picking at something under her nails. I ordered a bottled beer, which seemed safe enough. So, I said, Thursday nights, huh? Getting the weekend started early? Can't come on Fridays. It's 80s night and the place is packed. Hungry like a wolf on repeat until you want to bash your brains in. Ryan palmed a handful of peanuts and tossed them into his mouth. Sounds delightful. The waitress returned with my beer, and I took a swig, wincing a little at the bitter aftertaste. From behind me, I heard a commotion by the door, the rowdy boom of men's voices. Great, Cassie said, very dry. The king of Ludlow has arrived. Guess the party can start now. She looked at me. Hold on to your panties, Greer. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a pack of guys about our age amble inside. The one in the lead was Garrett Bloom, undeserving recipient of my high school crush, taker of my virginity in the backseat of his car at his senior prom. Me, drunk and crying over Eliza. Him, humping away, telling me he was about to make me feel so good. Which, by the way, turned out to be false advertising. Afterward, we barely spoke again. Oh, Jesus, I said, swinging back to face the table. He's a cop now, Ryan informed me. Maybe he can get his handcuffs out. Yeah, Cassie chimed in. Tell you what a bad girl you've been. I snorted out a laugh and a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. Hey now, is that Greer Dunning I spy? I caught Cassie's eye and her shit-eating grin as I looked up. Hey, Garrett, how's it going? Going great, going great. Garrett pulled out a chair without being invited, spun it around and straddled it, arms propped on the back. I tried very hard not to roll my eyes. He was still objectively good looking, light brown hair, green eyes, dimpled chin. But I had a hard time remembering what it was I ever found fascinating about him. He looked genetic to me now, interchangeable with 1,000 other guys who never had to work for a woman's attention a day in their lives, so grow to think they're entitled to it. Glad to hear it, I said, ignoring Ryan's foot pressing against mine under the table. I'm in law enforcement, Garrett told me. Been with the sheriff's department for almost 10 years. Dating a gal teaches 3rd grade here and now. Wow, I said. Sounds like you've done well for yourself. Be nice, I cautioned. An inside track with a local cop might come in handy if I play my cards right. Garrett nodded, flashed me the grin that used to make my stomach give birth to a whole net of butterflies. May have to dump the girlfriend, though, seeing as how you're back and looking good. He stretched the last word out to twice its normal length, capped it off with a wink and a click of his mouth. Charming, Cassie muttered, and I smiled around my upturned beer bottle. Well, I don't want to keep you from your friends, I said, glancing at the table behind me. I recognized the same crew of the guys Garrett had hung out with back in high school, Eric, Tag, and Connor, and returned their waves with a half-hearted one of my own. Looking at their faces triggered a quick, queasy flash of deja vu, as if we were all teenagers again. Travis and Eliza hovering on the edge of the party, just out of sight. I took a deep breath, blinking against the strangeness, forcing reality back into focus. Behind Garrett's friend, the door to the bar opened again and a man walked in. It took me a second to place him, only because he was the last person I expected to see in Doe. Dean Matthews. My breath stuttered in my chest, and I sucked in a little whooping gasp. Oh, hell no, Garrett said. What's that shit stain doing here? I watched as Dean took an empty stool at the far end of the bar, gesturing for the bartender with an upturned hand. The air in the room had turned thick with anticipation, everybody eyeing Dean and waiting for what might happen next. Want me to get rid of him? Garrett asked, chair legs scraping as he started to stand. I had a sudden vision of him making a scene, grabbing Dean by the scuff of his neck and the seat of his jeans and giving him the old heave-ho through the front door, or at least trying to. Something about Dean Matthews told me he probably learned the hard way how to hold his own against guys like Garrett. Leave him alone, it's fine. I looked around the table. Who's ready for a second round? I was up and walking to the bar before anyone could answer. The space next to Dean was open, and I slid into it, leaned forward, and rested my elbows on the bar top without making eye contact. I had no idea what I was doing, what I was hoping for. A conversation, an explanation, an apology. I spent years hating Roy Matthews, but by extension his entire family. The wrath always felt too large to rest on a single person. I blamed his grandmother for raising him wrong. I blamed his brother for not stopping him. I blamed them both for the violence Roy had unleashed into the world. But now, with one of my targets right in front of me, my anger was taking an ill-timed vacation, and I desperately needed to hold on to it, terrified of the other raw emotions buried behind my fury. Next to me, Dean was cupping a glass of amber liquid, remnants of white paint on his fingers. I glanced up and our eyes met in the mirror behind the bar. Dean took a swallow of his drink. "Spelling's not a strong suit around here," he said, flexing his free hand where more white paint linked his knuckles. "But they get their point across." His voice was deeper than I expected, his southern Kansas twang less pronounced than his brother's. "Does that happen a lot?" I asked. "People vandalizing your grandmother's house?" I felt suspended outside my body, listening to myself speak, but not really believing I was actually having a conversation with Roy's brother after all these years. He shrugged, "Often enough." I watched as he took another slug of his drink, set the glass back down with a sharp tap. I turned slightly away from him, signaling the bartender. "You weren't at the execution," Dean said. "No. For so long as I watched my family crumble and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it, I longed for the day when Roy Matthews would take his last breath. But in the end, I hadn't been brave enough to witness it. And Roy dying hadn't changed a damn thing." I looked at Dean. "You were there, I'm guessing." "Yeah, didn't want to be." He slid off the bar stool, slapped a $10 bill on the counter. But he was my brother. I couldn't let him die alone. And there it was, just in time. Resentment boiled up from the pit of my stomach, bile rising in my throat. Eliza might have been in Travis's arm when Roy pulled the trigger, but she still died alone, scared and without her family. My hand nodded on the bar top. "Are you seriously asking me to feel sorry for you right now?" Dean shook his head. "Believe me, Greer," he said, voice weary as he turned away. "I'm not asking you for anything at all." Well, okay, that's the end of chapter 4. He ain't asking you to forgive him. Okay. Okay. So, I got a thing in my head. Did her dad do it? And that's why he drinking so much? Or is he really going through grief? Okay. I'm thinking of the title of the book. I Did It For You. And if she don't think Roy did it and it happened again, it got to be somebody in the town, right? Because it happened on the same day. It happened in the same place. It happened exactly the same. So one side of my brain want to know who killed her sister. Then the second side want to know if it's the same person that did kill her sister and Travis. Guess we shall find out as the chapters go. But there was one word I had never seen before. Don't know the definition. Don't even know how to pronounce it. So stay tuned for the definition video. Bye for now. Okay, welcome back to the definition portion. The word that I don't know the definition of or know how to pronounce it is spelled Curmudgeon. And this is how it is pronounced.
Curmudgeon.
Curmudgeon. Okay, never heard it before. It is a noun and it says a bad-tempered person, especially an old one. Okay, let's hear it one more time.
Curmudgeon.
Curmudgeon. Okay, in the sentence it says, Chet has always been Ludlow's residential curmudgeon with a heaping side of busybody. It makes sense now. Okay, well, that's the end of chapter 4. I shall see you in the next chapter. Bye.